Everybody will come to order, and I want to apologize for being a bit late. We did have some votes on the floor, so I appreciate your indulgence. Ladies and gentlemen, in 1994, as we all know, the East African nation of Rwanda experienced one of the most horrific genocides in modern times. An estimated 800,000 Rwandans, mostly ethnic Tutsis and moderates among the ethnic Hutus, were brutally murdered in a state-backed extermination campaign that lasted for months. Hutu-Tutsi tensions, of course, date back to colonial times when the Belgians created a superior class composed of Tutsis, shutting out Hutus from government jobs and higher education, despite the Hutus comprising about 85% of the population. In 1959 and in 1960, tensions among the Hutus exploded in a campaign that left 20,000 Tutsis dead and created about 300,000 Tutsi refugees. As with this earlier genocide, the international community watched largely from the sidelines during the 1994 genocide in Rwanda, as the death toll rose from April until July of that year, until the Rwandan Patriotic Front, or RPF, defeated the Hutu-led government military. More than 2 million mostly Hutu refugees flooded into the Democratic Republic of Congo, leading to continuing problems in that country. The RPF-led Rwandan government has criticized the United Nations for sheltering Hutu participants in the genocide and for allowing them to arm in refugee camps. Over the years, the RPF has used the guilt of the international community as a shield to prevent criticism of its action. UN Ambassador Samantha Power referred to Ambassador Susan Rice and her colleagues in the Clinton administration in the 1990s as bystanders to genocide. She quotes Dr. Rice in the 2002 book saying, "If we use the word genocide and we are seen as doing nothing, and what will be the effect on the November congressional election?" she asked. Part of Rice's team during those years was Gail Smith, the current nominee to head the U.S. Agency for International Development. As far back as May of 1998, I chaired a hearing, and I chaired many hearings on the genocide, but at this one included testimony about the willful U.S. neglect in preventing the Rwandan genocide. As recounted in the issue of New Yorker magazine at the time, a high-ranking Rwandan informant had warned the UN leadership, including Kofi Annan, and we actually had a hearing on the famous fax that was sent, and we had the reporter who broke that story, and the United at a hearing, and the United States about preparations for killing 3 months before they actually began. And we all will recall that the UN peacekeepers had actionable information that went unacted upon. Furthermore, the United States has been accused of not merely of inaction, but also of obstructing preemptive multilateral efforts to quell the crisis. Some have alleged that, in the words of Refugees International President Lionel Rosenblatt, who also testified at my hearings, and he said, and I quote in pertinent part, "The ball was not only dropped by the United States, it was blocked by the United States." Paul Kagame, now president of Rwanda, was hailed as one of Africa's new leaders by Dr. Rice and her team during the 1990s, and there has been no apparent change in their high opinion of him since then, despite what Deputy Assistant Secretary Robert Jackson describes as several public administration statements related to human rights concerns and the ongoing dialogue with the Rwandan government. Matter of fact, Secretary Jackson, I'm very glad that you very clearly and unambiguously point out that activities that are seen by the government as possible threats of national security or the political dominance of the government RPF are often met with intolerance and harsh punishments. And you point out again, over the past year, Rwandans have quietly reported the disappearances and suspected deaths of family members at the hands of the Rwandan security services. These reports, as you go on to say, come from a wide cross-section of Rwandan society, cutting across geographical, socioeconomic, and ethnic lines. In the Human Rights Report, it is clear, a little bit ambiguous the way it's written. It says there are fewer reports of disappearances and politically motivated abductions or kidnappings than in previous years. But local human rights organizations ceased investigating disappearances in 2012 after reporting pressure from the government officials, including threats and allegations of treason. President Kagame, I would go on to say, has been considered a hero on the international stage and has long been immune and I say this regrettably, to public criticism. However, human rights reports about abuses in Rwanda have grown over the years. And as I just quoted, there was much been said by our Assistant Secretary and others within the administration. In recent years, there have been credible reports that the RPF government has commissioned assassins to kill dissidents living in exile who criticize the government or attempt to form political associations or parties. Several years ago, our committee chairman, Ed Royce, and I were told face-to-face by Paul Rusena of Hotel Rwanda fame that the Rwandan government had targeted him and was behind several attempts on his life in Belgium. I mean, people can snicker and laugh, but frankly, he told us that, and he was very worried about his own personal safety. In early 2014, former Rwandan intelligence chief Faustin Kayumba, who had been living in exile in South Africa, was found murdered in his hotel room in Johannesburg. Kayumba was one of two dissidents. One of our witnesses today, former Rwandan Major Robert Higero, says he was asked to have killed. He was asked to be the assassin. The assassination plot, he revealed, was investigated and substantiated in a series of articles in Canada's Globe and Mail newspaper, which interviewed Rwandan exiles in South Africa and in Belgium. Since 2012, this subcommittee has held a series of hearings on the violence perpetuated by various militia in eastern DRC. Perhaps the best known of them, the so-called M23, was supported by Rwanda. This Congress has enacted restrictions on some military assistance to Rwanda in response to its involvement in militia activity in the DRC, and involvement in resource smuggling from that country as uncovered in several UN reports. These charges of serious human rights and other abuses will be troubling in any case, but Rwanda is a country that has enjoyed significant U.S. and international support. By largely avoiding criticism of Rwandan human rights issues, the Bush and Obama administrations raised appropriations to Rwanda from $39 million in 2003 to $188 million. And some of it is for very laudable goals, like UN peacekeeping and some of the health initiatives, including food security. But again, some of it has been for other issues. Rwanda, due to donor aid, political stability, and favorable investor policies, has grown by an average of 8% over the last decade. Yet donors began reducing or redirecting funds in 2012 because of Rwanda's role in supporting M23. The growing reports of human rights abuses also are leading to caution among donor nations about directly supporting the Rwandan government. And this hearing is going to focus on that. We have two very distinguished witnesses I will introduce shortly. I'd like to yield to our distinguished ranking member, Karen Bass.
Thank you, Chairman Smith, for your leadership and for holding today's hearing on developments in Rwanda, providing us with the opportunity to discuss the nation's challenges. While Rwanda is geographically a small nation, its condition and role in the stability of the Great Lakes region is critical. I'd also like to thank our distinguished witnesses today, including Ambassador Jackson and Steve Fieldstein from the Department of State, as well as several members of the Rwandan diaspora and the international human rights community. I look forward to hearing your varied perspectives on both the successes and challenges of developments in Rwanda. As I often say, Mr. Chair, there's lots of challenges on the continent of Africa, and I'm always concerned that focusing on those challenges, while very important, it's also important to talk about where there have been some developments. And part of the irony of Rwanda, in just 2 decades since the tragic events of the 1994 genocide, the economy has been a bright spot on the continent and has maintained steady growth every year. According to the World Bank, Rwanda is on track to meet most of the MDG goals by the end of 2015, and I know reports are that the poverty rate has dropped. From a business perspective, Rwanda is often considered one of the easiest places to do business in sub-Saharan Africa. One of the things that has always been interesting to me, as I have received many international delegations and many delegations from Africa, is Rwanda has made incredible strides in empowering women to occupy seats in government. In recent years, the parliament has grown to include almost 2/3 majority of women as they hold 64% of the seats in parliament. But with all of this, the Rwandan government has also faced accusations from many in the international community of being authoritarian and heavy-handed in its repression of dissent and political opposition. This repression has included threats to journalists, detainment of political opponents, and even the killing of political dissenters. In view of both the spectacular economic and development gains in Rwanda and the international community's concerns over human rights and freedom of speech, association, and assembly in the country, I hope that today's discussion will help to illuminate the challenges in Rwanda and also perhaps provide a pathway forward for where U.S. foreign policy should go. And I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Bass. I'd like to now introduce our first two very distinguished witnesses, beginning with the acting administrator for African Affairs, Robert Jackson, Ambassador Jackson, who is currently, as I said, the acting assistant, I should say. He previously served as ambassador to Cameroon, as well as deputy chief of mission and charge at the U.S. embassies in Morocco and Senegal. He also served as at U.S. embassies in Burundi, Zimbabwe, Portugal, and Canada. At the State Department headquarters, he has worked in the commercial and consular sections and conducted officer training. He has also performed oversight work in the Office for the Promotion of Democracy and Human Rights after 9/11. Ambassador Jackson has appeared before this subcommittee several times, and we're always appreciative of his insights and his recommendations. Then we'll hear from Mr. Stephen Feldstein, who is the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State in the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor, is responsible for its work in Africa on international labor affairs and international religious freedom. Previously, Mr. Feldstein served as Director of the Office of Policy in the Bureau for Policy Planning and Learning at USAID, and served as counsel on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, where he oversaw a portfolio that included oversight of all U.S. foreign assistance agencies, budgets, and programs, State Department management, operations, and international organizations. Mr. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Bass, thank you very much for this opportunity to discuss U.S. efforts to support the Rwandan government and people as they continue rebuilding their political, economic, and social structures following the 1994 genocide. In the interest of respecting the committee's time, Mr. Chairman, I would like to submit a longer version of my testimony for the record, which you have, and just read a shorter version.
Without objection, so ordered.
For Rwanda, as for many countries in Africa, our policy is built around four interdependent and mutually reinforcing objectives. One, to strengthen democratic institutions. Two, to spur economic growth, trade, and investment. Three, to advance peace and security. And four, to promote opportunity and development. Rwanda has made enormous strides in spurring economic growth and promoting development, while we continue to encourage further progress in ensuring that Rwanda plays a constructive role in the region and respects human rights and democratic principles. Let me first talk about Rwanda's economic and development successes. Rwanda has become a model of inclusive economic growth and a world leader in leveraging development assistance into socioeconomic gains for the vast majority of its people. The United States and Rwanda share the belief that trade, investment, technological development, and market forces are keys to Rwanda's long-term economic development. The commitment of the United States to supporting Rwanda's economic and social development is strong. U.S. aid assistance to Rwanda's education sector more than doubled from fiscal year 2012 to present, and many American companies and community service organizations that have started operations in Rwanda in recent years. We have been proud to partner with Rwanda in the last decade as its economy has grown at an average of over 7% per year, as its infant and child mortality rates have been halved, and as HIV and malaria rates have been reduced dramatically, with help from the President's Emergency Fund for AIDS Relief, PEPFAR, and the President's Malaria Initiative, PMI, respectively. With regard to Rwanda's contribution to regional peace and security, I would highlight that Rwanda is one of the world's most active and effective UN peacekeepers, the fifth largest contributor of troops in the world, despite its small size and population. Its peacekeepers serve in many of the world's most complicated conflicts, including the Central African Republic, South Sudan, and Darfur, and frequently distinguish themselves by a willingness to take strong actions to protect civilians under imminent threat of violence. We have recognized Rwanda's leading role in peacekeeping through its designation as a priority partner in President Obama's Africa Peacekeeping Rapid Response Partnership. At the same time, we continue to encourage Rwanda to play a constructive role in the Great Lakes region, and we were pleased when Rwanda ended its support to the M23 rebellion in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC, and supported the Nairobi declarations that ended that conflict. We share Rwanda's continued concerns over the presence in Eastern DRC of the Democratic Forces for the Liberation of Rwanda, or FDLR, the armed group, and we are encouraging the DRC government, together with the UN peacekeeping operation MONUSCO, to carry out effective counterinsurgency efforts against this abhorrent armed group. In the current crisis in Burundi, we have encouraged all countries in the region, including Rwanda, not to take unilateral actions and to work through multilateral frameworks to support a peaceful resolution to the internal conflict stemming from Burundian President Nkurunziza's decision to seek a third term in violation of the Arusha Accord. Unfortunately, however, Rwanda's record of building democratic institutions and ensuring full respect for human rights is mixed. In response to and to protect against further destructive cycles of mass violence, the Rwandan government has developed a strong state with an intense commitment to internal safety and security, national unity, and socioeconomic development. As a result, on the positive side, Rwanda is a country with low corruption and a strong record for combating not only corruption, but demanding high accountability and performance from its public officials, as well as ensuring prosecution for those who break the law. Violent crime rates are extremely low and have been dropping consistently over the last decade. Rwanda is a leader in combating trafficking in persons, having put in place a comprehensive nationwide anti-trafficking plan that it is aggressively implementing with NGOs and partners. Rwanda is also a leader in promoting the rights of disabled persons, and especially for elevating women to position of leadership in government. As Congresswoman Bass noted, 63% of its parliament is female. Thus, Rwanda boasts the highest number of women lawmakers anywhere in the world, and the rights of LGBTI persons are respected. There is also another side to the security coin, however. Activities that are seen by the government as possible threats to national security or the political dominance of the governing Rwandan Patriotic Front, or RPF, are often met with intolerance and harsh punishment. In some of these cases, suspected wrongdoers are submitted to the Rwandan judicial system in a transparent manner, but in other cases they are not. Over the past year, Rwandans have quietly reported the disappearance and suspected deaths of family members at the hands of the Rwandan security services. These reports, as you noted, Mr. Chairman, come from a wide cross-section of Rwandan society, cutting across geographical, socioeconomic, and ethnic lines. In recent years, domestic human rights organizations have found it increasingly difficult to monitor and report on human rights violations and abuses. Among international human rights organizations, only Human Rights Watch maintains a permanent presence in Rwanda. Its staff reports surveillance and occasional harassment by government officials and security services. Restrictions on press freedoms in Rwanda continue to be a serious concern. Human rights concerns are part and parcel of our ongoing dialogue with the Rwandan government, however. We are concerned that political competition in Rwanda continues to be limited. There are 11 registered political parties. However, 10 are aligned with the ruling RPF and a government of consensus. Only one, the Democratic Green Party, which advocates for policy alternatives and has taken a position against the removal of term limit positions in the Constitution, has no seats in Parliament. We believe democracy is strengthened by inclusive political processes and active debate between parties and citizens. We continue to encourage the Rwandan government to ensure protection of political freedoms, particularly in the lead up to elections. The upcoming 2017 presidential election will be pivotal for Rwanda's future. Our consistent message to President Kagame and the government of Rwanda, as it has been with other leaders in Africa facing elections, is that political space should be open to opposition parties that embrace peaceful, democratic dialogue and transition. This includes ensuring freedom of expression, press freedoms, the ability of citizens to criticize the government and ruling party, and the ability of all to campaign freely for the candidates and causes they believe in. We also believe that neither parties nor individuals should seek to change constitutions to extend their terms in office for personal or political gain. This is a principle that we uphold throughout the world. As we are sadly witnessing in Burundi, there are serious negative consequences when one group limits the ability of others to participate fully in the political process. In our view, the best way to ensure long-term stability and prevent violence is by making sure that all peaceful voices are allowed to speak and be heard. So, while we applaud Rwanda's great development success, we should not ignore the need for strong and transparent democratic institutions that will lay the foundation for long-term stability and economic growth. As Rwandans have shown by building a strong and dynamic country over the course of 2 decades, they have the ability to meet difficult challenges beyond all expectations. We will continue to work in partnership with Rwanda to help it build the prosperous and democratic country that Rwandans seek. I thank the committee.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you so very much for your testimony. Mr. Feldstein.
Thank you, Chairman Smith, Ranking Member Bass. Thank you for holding this important hearing. I know it's been several years since the committee last held a dedicated hearing on Rwanda, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak today. Like Ambassador Jackson, I have a longer version of testimony for the record I'd like to submit. Great. Rwanda holds a very personal connection for me. 15 years ago, I first went to Rwanda as a fellow with the International Rescue Committee. I spent a year in the country supporting its efforts to recover from war and genocide. Living in Rwanda had a profound impact on me and has been a key inspiration for my decision to pursue a career in foreign policy and human rights. Rwanda's progress since the 1994 genocide has been remarkable, with an annual growth rate that has averaged 7%, with 1 million people removed out of extreme poverty, with having achieved close to 100% primary school enrollment, and with infant mortality down over 60% since 1990, the accomplishments have been significant. Several years ago, I paid a return visit to Kigali, and I found a city profoundly changed. Modern office towers have replaced dilapidated buildings. The streets were spotless, thanks in part to a widely acclaimed ban on plastic bags. New businesses seem to be springing up daily, such as coffee ventures supplying top-quality beans to U.S. brands like Starbucks and Peet's. But this is only part of the story. Alongside Rwanda's development progress, there have been equally consistent efforts to reduce space for independent voices and to diminish the ability of the media, opposition groups, and civil society to operate. This space matters. It is essential not only for democratic progress, but for cementing Rwanda's impressive economic and development gains. We see 3 key trends in Rwanda's human rights situation. First, political space in Rwanda and the overall human rights environment continues to shrink. Second, this trend is reinforcing the wrong lessons for Rwanda, particularly that a country can continue to experience robust economic growth and foreign investment even while repressing its citizens further and reducing democratic space. This is not a sustainable path. At some point, if unchecked, human rights violations will begin to affect Rwanda's economic performance, stability, and foreign investment. Third, Rwanda's human rights record is setting a disturbing precedent for the region and continent. Other countries are carefully watching Rwanda's model of economic liberalization and political repression. My counterparts frequently point to Rwanda and question whether protecting the rights of their citizens matters if they can achieve substantial economic development. The answer, of course, is that protecting the rights of all of Rwanda's citizens and residents matters immensely to Rwanda's long-term stability and prosperity, to its continued positive economic trajectory, and to whether other countries recognize they can follow a similar path to greater prosperity. Rwanda can be a model for the region, or it can slip backwards over time, never truly fulfilling its potential. We have articulated our concerns about Rwanda's human rights record for many years directly to Rwanda's senior leaders, including President Kagame. And we have highlighted Rwanda's deteriorating situation through the State Department's annual human rights report. The department's 2013 report for Rwanda noted that the government harassed, arrested, and abused political opponents and human rights advocates, disregarded the rule of law, and placed significant restrictions on freedom of expression, peaceful assembly and association, and the press. It also highlighted reports that arbitrary or unlawful killings took place both inside and outside Rwanda. The credibility of elections provides an important indication of the level of space for independent voices and views. Unfortunately, presidential elections in 2010 and parliamentary elections in 2013 were beset by irregularities both in the pre-electoral period and on Election Day. This includes suppressing and denying registration to opposition parties, security officials present in polling booths, multiple voting, and local election officials filling up ballots in the absence of voters. Rwanda's next presidential election is in 2017, and we are cautiously hopeful that this election will mark an improvement upon previous contests. Our concerns about restrictions on fundamental freedoms extend beyond electoral processes. The U.S. has expressed deep concern about the arrest and disappearance of dozens of Rwandan citizens, as well as credible reports that individual journalists are being threatened and sometimes directly censored. Rwandan journalists routinely self-censor their work, and some journalists have been detained or threatened for reporting deemed to be critical of the government. Last year, the Rwandan government shut down the BBC Kinyarwanda broadcast because of a controversial documentary about President Kagame and the genocide. We are concerned that since establishing the Rwanda Media Commission as an independent body, the government has interfered with its work, undermined its role as the sole regulator of media content, and at times threatened commissioners. We are also deeply troubled by what appears to be politically motivated murders of prominent Rwandan exiles. This includes the December 2013 killing of former Rwandan government official Colonel Patrick Karegeya, who was found dead in a hotel room in South Africa. Months later, armed men raided the South African home of former Rwandan Army Chief of Staff Kayumba Nyamwasa, who had been previously targeted for assassination attempts. President Kagame's 2014 statements about consequences for those who betray Rwanda has further heightened these concerns. Also of deep concern are dozens of corpses, some bound and wrapped in sacks, that appeared in Lake Rweru along the border between Rwanda and Burundi in 2014. 4 of those bodies were recovered and buried in Burundi. Fishermen reported that on 2 separate nights in September, Rwandan Marines attempted to exhume the bodies, allegedly to return them to Rwanda. In December, Burundi accepted an offer of forensic assistance funded by the U.S. and several other donors for an African Union-led investigation into the 4 recovered bodies. Rwandan officials stated that the government also supported a joint investigation, but no investigation has been conducted. The U.S. continues to press the African Union to move forward with an investigation and accountability for those responsible. Rwanda is an important ally. It is a respected contributor to peacekeeping missions. It has rebuilt itself from genocide, and it has achieved impressive development and economic gains. I believe there's a bright future ahead for its people, which is why Rwanda's current human rights situation is so personally disappointing to me. Ensuring respect for freedoms of expression, association, and peaceful assembly, and respect for the rule of law is essential for cementing and building from these gains. The United States will continue to urge Rwanda to respect the rights of all its citizens. Thank you very much, and I welcome your questions.
Very much for your testimony and for being so thoroughly candid about your personal as well as professional disappointment when it comes to the human rights situation as practiced by the Rwandan government. Let me just ask you, one of our witnesses in a few moments will be testifying, Higaro, Robert Higaro, who was in the military for a number of years, and he was interviewed by General Dan Muyunza, who's the director of military intelligence, who said, "We have decided to give you this job, kill General Kayumba and the colonel you just mentioned, Karegeya, who died, of course, and you mentioned that in your testimony as you concluded. And I'm wondering, in a couple of days, a Bishop Romero will be beatified by Pope Francis, who was killed by all indications by a right-wing death squad in El Salvador. I remember I had a meeting with President Duarte during the fight, when the fight was between the FMLN and between, of course, the government. And I, for one, was one of those who believed passionately in strong human rights conditionality, and it was contrary to the Reagan administration. They didn't want it. And I asked President Duarte about that, about the conditionality. And frankly, in an absolute moment of candor and refreshing candor, he said, keep the human rights conditionality. Because there were people, I gleaned from that conversation, even within his own government, that he did not have confidence or trust for. But there's concern that when it comes to Kagame, how high up does this go? Does it go to his level? And you know, when I interviewed and spoke to Robert, who will again be testifying shortly, I asked him about that, and the answer, and he'll tell it in his own words, was not a good one in terms of complicity, if not outright direction from the very top, when it comes to death squads, which both of you in your testimonies have brought great, I think, focus upon. And I thank you again for that candor. You know, it is great to be providing troops for peacekeeping, and it is great to be doing an economic model that seems to be flourishing for some. But I think, as you pointed out, you know, the human rights record is setting a disturbing precedent for the region and the continent. That's very much of an indictment. What we all hoped would be a turning of the page seems to be turning in the opposite direction. And that was, again, your, Mr. Feldstein, that was in your testimony just a moment ago. So I wonder if you could tell us, have you tried to interview Mr. Higuero? He is here, if not now, in the near future. He certainly has been very prominent, and I think he lives in some concern of a potential death squad coming after him, and I say that with great sadness. The others that you mentioned in your testimony, Mr. Ambassador, which I thought was excellent. We expressed concern in January of 2014 about the succession of what appeared to be politically motivated killings of government critics in exile. And then you went through a whole long list. I'm wondering, when we raise that with Paul Kagame, what is the response? Is it denial? Is it, you know, we are committed to tracking down who committed these extrajudicial killings, like in South Africa when they track the colonel down? What has been the response, and could you provide those responses for the record if you don't have it with you today? I'd love to see them. And how high up does it go? I mean, death squads are death squads, and when people are killing critics, we have to be absolutely clear that there is a penalty from our point of view to that kind of behavior. Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Allow me to address your second and third questions. As for Mr. Higuera, the State Department has certainly had contact with him. He's well known, and we will continue contacts with him. As for President Kagame's...
Before you go off,
yes.
Leave that. Did you find him credible? Were you able to take any of that information? Was it actionable? He has tape recordings that he shared with the global, a Canadian newspaper, which seems to make a very clear case that they attempted to hire him to do an assassination. He turned it down, not just one but two, again, putting his life at peril. Did you hear those recordings yourself?
I have not heard the recordings, Mr. Chairman. And
Did anybody at State?
I believe people at State have. Mr. Feldstein may have more information about that.
I don't have personal information on this specific case. I can say in general, we have looked at a number of the different allegations that have been mentioned in testimony today, and we do find a significant amount of those to be credible, enough to warrant further discussion.
What is the response when you from Paul Kagame?
So I think President Kagame has been very clear in his public and private statements, and they've been consistent that he's very concerned about people who he sees in opposition. He appears to distrust any political dissent and freedom of speech, and fears another genocide, Mr. Chairman, which does not in and of itself justify repression, but it's certainly reflective of his mindset.
But in no way is a suitable excuse
I agree.
for killing people. Will you interview our witness in the next panel? And
I will make certain that my colleagues renew their contacts with him, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just add, in terms of how far high up does it go and what are we looking at when it comes to decision-making, I think a lot of that is still somewhat opaque, but I think one of the points that we mentioned is the fact that there have been statements attributed to President Kagame publicly that does talk about the threat inherent to certain actors in terms of what they say and how that affects the country. So I think the rhetoric has been dangerous, and I think the other thing that we do recognize is that in terms of how Rwandan government and the military is organized, it tends to be a fairly tightly controlled group that has very close links to the very top, and so we can make some assumptions that there is at least some knowledge of some of the actions that have been documented in the human rights reports and so forth.
is there any evidence or is there any suspicion on the part of the state that it's coming from the top? I mean, it almost begs credulity that somehow he's not aware of it and perhaps not even directing it.
Mr. Chairman, I think there's a lot of credible evidence suggesting that President Kagame is aware of it. Whether he is ordering it or not is not entirely clear, but certainly he's aware of it, and awareness means that he should act upon it.
And he has not.
And to my knowledge, he has not.
Chairman Royce asked that I ask you a couple of questions with regards to VOA in Rwanda. He sent a letter a couple of weeks ago to the Broadcasting Board of Governors, BBG, expressing deep concern over their plan to end VOA local language broadcasts in Rwanda. And he has asked that I ask you, does the State Department believe radio to be a powerful news medium in Rwanda? Does state support the closure of VOA local language broadcasts there? And do you believe the remaining broadcasts in English and French will reach a broad audience given the fact that large majority still speak Kinyarwanda?
Mr. Chairman, the State Department strongly supports continuation of the broadcasts in Kinyarwanda and Kirundi. We believe that they are very useful, particularly with the closure of the British Kinyarwanda service emissions to Rwanda. And we hope that we can work with the Broadcasting Board of Governors and with this committee to ensure the continuation of those broadcasts.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I would echo those sentiments extremely strongly. I think with the closing of the BBC Kinyarwanda service, this is the last international service available to a large portion of Rwandans that is broadcast in Kinyarwanda that they can access and have information, especially as we lead up to some very critical milestones, including the 2017 elections. So I think it's extremely important to allow that access to information, especially given the fact that local sources are more and more self-censored, if not directly censored.
Let me ask you, the South African government has taken legal action against alleged assassins. Have any other governments taken a legal approach in response to killings of Rwandans abroad? For example, have the Belgians reacted in any way?
Not to our knowledge, Mr. Chairman, but the South African investigation of the murder in the hotel room continues.
Can I just ask you, if again Kagame is at least acquiescing to, if not directly complicit in these assassinations and attempted assassinations, what would that do to our response to his government and to him personally?
We are constantly reviewing our relations and possible sanctions against leaders who violate human rights. And Mr. Chairman, I want to be on the record saying that in terms of our cooperation with the Rwandan Armed Forces and Security Services, we ensure that they are vetted in compliance with the Leahy laws for not having committed gross violations of human rights.
But how does that pan out when the Director of Intelligence and other high-ranking military people appear to be complicit in these killings?
The appearance of complicity is the issue, Mr. Chairman, and we're continuing to look into it.
Do we have a task force or a very dedicated group of people trying to ferret out the information on this? Because it seems to me this cries out for, I mean, if he's involved with this, or again, acquiescing to it, or in any way complicit, I mean, these are serious crimes.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think in terms of at least how the connection between the allegations of gross violations of human rights and the assistance that we provide to armed forces, we go through a very stringent vetting process. Every name that either potentially will receive some type of assistance or units that will receive assistance go through a screening process that's done by a team of people, both through post as well as in Washington. It goes through a database, and so far the names that have been submitted have proven to be clean. You know, I do think that when it does come to some of the allegations that are mentioned, I don't think they extend extremely widely into the broader armed forces.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, I'm sorry.
I do think that they tend to be probably more localized in a smaller cohort of people. But we do take very seriously every single allegation, and we are making sure to be very vigilant about ensuring that the assistance that we provide on the security side does conform to Leahy requirements.
Again, I hope when all the information is out, if he is clean, let's ascertain that. But if he's not, and we are, you know, unwittingly aiding and abetting him, that would be we've done that before under administrations of both Republicans and Democrats. And what I'm suggesting is that there needs to be a very aggressive look to see what his complicity is with regards to these extrajudicial killings. And you know, you only have to intimidate so many people to get everyone else to toe the line, or at least mute. We know that with human rights groups not being there, except for perhaps Human Rights Watch, that the reporting becomes less robust because it is that much harder to come by. People are less willing to talk. It has a chilling effect, I would think, on the real snapshot of what is truly going on in Rwanda. I would just ask, Mr. Ambassador, you were somewhat effusive when it came to trafficking and their record in combating human trafficking. I know they have a national plan. I've seen it. But my information suggests that last year they were designated Tier 2 watch list. And you might recall, I wrote that law, the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. I wrote the watch list, which we put in not as a parking lot, but as a between, on the bubble between an egregious violator as well, and those who have a problem and they're at least trying to take some action. I don't see much change from last year to this when it comes to investigations and actions, when it comes to penalties, people getting jail sentences. You know, you can do a lot to put a superficial glean on with a national plan, but if you don't get people who are going to jail and getting real jail time, breaking up brothels, and you know, and as you know, the opening statement in the TIP report couldn't be more condemning about Rwanda and, you know, forced labor, sex trafficking, and it goes on about how so many of these people are exported to other countries like commodities. I just hope that, you know, and I know there's always a battle between the TIP office and the bureaus, that when it comes to the designation, we will not err on give Kagame a pass, but we will say exactly what is happening on the ground in real terms, not in superficial terms, in terms of having a plan and saying we're doing this, doing that, when in reality it's not being done. I just would urge you, just speak truth to power. What you do in terms of the penalty phase, which we wrote into the law, you know, that shoe drops later, you know, that's largely up to you, if not exclusively up to you. But getting it right, they are Tier 2 watch list now, and that's like a threadbare, or a thread, I should say, an inch away from being an egregious violator as a Tier 3 country. Mr. Ambassador.
Mr. Chairman, the tier and the overall trafficking report for 2014 are still being finalized, so decisions about rankings have not yet been made. However, I can tell you absolutely that there have been prosecutions, there has been a real effort at protection. We understand that more than 3,000 children and women have received benefits of services provided by the Rwandan government in centers for women who have been the victims of gender-based violence and children who have been in conflict. I think that I'm confident that will be reflected in the report, and I believe statistics about prosecutions will show the trend. I would say that I think what's significant in terms of trafficking in persons is that the Rwandan government has ceased its support for M23 and therefore for M23's child soldiering, and I feel it's important to recognize that. That is a significant change from
I don't
years
think that
past.
should give them an enhanced, I mean, that was so egregious that they were backing M23 that it defies that they got away with it for as long as they did. And Rwanda, as you know, does not offer trafficking-specific aftercare for survivors. And that's a very serious omission I would respectfully submit on their part. I'm hoping that my distinguished friend and colleague, Ms. Bass, she wanted to ask some questions. Will be returning shortly. She going back? Again, just to reiterate, in a way, you will interview, I hope, our witness as he comes forward in the next panel. And if you could get back to us what Kagame's reaction to our protests, and I assume demarches, and have we gotten to that point where we demarche him on the extrajudicial killings? Have we made I mean, how have we conveyed our displeasure over these killings, assassinations?
Mr. Chairman, I was in a meeting with President Kagame last summer on the margins of the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit. I can assure you that we raised our human rights concerns with him forthrightly.
And did we do it with specific names of murdered individuals, and for a clear explanation as to what their understanding of it is and whether or not they were complicit in any way? I expect a denial on the complicity part, but you know, it's not until certain colonels and certain people are being indicted and convicted that we can take seriously that they are against extrajudicial killings. And that's exactly what we argued in the 80s with the FMLN and the Duarte government. Okay, where are the convictions? How many people have you grabbed and put behind bars for slaughtering people, including Archbishop Romero? And my understanding is the killers have never been found in that case. So do you get down to that level?
We do not usually get to that level, Mr. Chairman. However, the Human Rights Report documents in great detail individual cases, and I will defer to my colleague here about the release of the next Human Rights Report, but I believe it's imminent.
Yeah, we intend to make an announcement, I think, in the next, in a short period about the release of the Human Rights Report. Really, at this point, it's just been a matter of finding the right moment in the Secretary's schedule to allow that to happen,
Right.
given the importance that we place with having him actually deliver and this year's report.
And could you give me your assurance that you will interview Mr. Higuero and have your relevant staff, if necessary, listen to those recordings because they're devastating?
Yeah, absolutely. I will take that back to my colleagues, and we'll make sure that they connect with him.
Ms. Bass.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. You are probably aware, Ambassador Jackson, that a few weeks ago I was involved along with Chairman Royce and probably Chairman Smith as well in expressing concerns over the VOA. And I was just wanting to know if you could comment about that, especially if, you know, what you think about that, whether or not we will be able to keep VOA open and on the air in Rwanda.
Congresswoman Bass, as I said to Chairman Smith, I want to assure you that we believe VOA's broadcast in Kinyarwanda and Kirundi provide an enormous service. They are the only source of outside information in local languages for many of the people who listen to them, and we strongly support their continuation.
Well, with that, maybe you could talk about kind of where we are in our relationship with Rwanda, the thrust of U.S.-funded programs to increase civil society. What is the dialogue? I mean, it's often said in these hearings that we send messages to the government about one subject or another, but it's not really clear what the response back is. And I believe Chairman Smith was asking you questions along those lines when unfortunately I had to leave. But it's one thing that we send messages. What are the messages back?
So for fiscal year 2015, we've set aside $2 million for programs on rule of law and civil society strengthening.
And so tell me what that means. Give me an example.
So I don't know. Let me give an example from another country because I don't have the facts for Rwanda in front of me. But for civil society strengthening in Cameroon, where I was last posted overseas, we brought in Freedom House to do seminars, training, to help the civil society groups do fundraising. And one of the really remarkable results of that was that the civil society groups decided to form their own coalitions, because one of the struggles that we've had in Cameroon has been that civil society has been so fractional and divided. So our goals in these programs are to bring people together to advocate for common causes, and I would envision the same type of program in Rwanda. As for rule of law programs, across Africa, we're working with judiciaries to help them to be stronger, more organized, more independent. And
Is that accepted in Rwanda?
I'd have to get back to you on that. And I'd like to defer to my colleague on some of DRL's programming, if I may.
Thank you, Congresswoman Bass. I would also have to defer in terms of the specifics of the Rwanda program, but we do have a couple different things that we use that are applicable across Africa. These include specific human rights defenders programs that when there are dissidents or activists under duress, we're able to provide needed assistance to help them find safe space. We also have broader civil society strengthening programs. That means trainings outside of the country as appropriate in case to help build their capacity and ability to exert leadership at the right moments. I think one of the challenges in Rwanda, as I mentioned, and as we document in the Human Rights Report, is that they have fairly restrictive NGO registration laws. They watch very carefully the activities of different civil society groups. Anytime a group moves across a sort of an invisible line when it comes to political activity or human rights activity, there tends to be a pretty stern, quiet reaction. And so that has really led to a chilling effect when it comes to the ability of civil society to operate in a free and fair manner. Now, I think there is a broader amount of space available for service provision NGOs who do more development and humanitarian assistance work, and I think that's something that is a positive. But on this sort of more political human rights front, we've had a lot of problems in terms of finding groups that we can work with who aren't subject to the type of restrictions I mentioned.
Can you describe some of the service programs that we fund in Rwanda?
There's a range of those, and I would defer that more towards colleagues at USAID in particular, but in my prior experience, I know they range from health programs to agriculture to other of the sort of standard run of development programs that USAID oversees.
So what about our security assistance to Rwanda, specifically?
Let me address that, Congresswoman Bass. So our security assistance is primarily in terms of peacekeeping training and support for Rwandan peacekeeping. Rwanda is involved in 8 peacekeeping operations with over 5,500 soldiers and police involved in those operations. We, you may recall, suspended at the direction of this Congress our international military education and training programs in 2012. The plan is to resume those this year, but so our security assistance has been focused on supporting Rwanda's deployments in peacekeeping
What are we
operations.
resuming this year?
International military education and training.
What does that mean?
So this is primarily bringing officers and enlisted men from Rwanda to the United States for specific training programs.
Yeah, that's one of the things that's always confusing to me about our policy, because, you know, we're going to criticize the government for their human rights record, and then we're going to train their military. So, you know, it's like, which one is it?
I respectfully submit that you need to do both. And it's important to train the military in order to make sure that they do not commit gross violations of human rights and that they are effective peacekeepers.
Yeah, it's just that it seems like some of the time it doesn't turn out that way, right? So I would like to ask, not to put you on the spot here, but maybe you could get back to me with some of the specific democracy programs. And then I'm also interested in to what extent we fund Rwandans versus fund U.S. contractors to do work in Rwanda. How much of it goes to NGOs that Rwandans run?
I will have to get back to you on that.
No,
comment.
that's what I was asking.
And
I know that you don't know that now. You made reference, I believe, Ambassador Jackson, in your opening remarks to Burundi, and I was wondering if you could expand on that in terms of what is happening, obviously in relation to Rwanda. But I don't remember exactly what you said. I want you to expand on it.
So in Burundi, we see protests continuing following the coup attempt. The protests have now gone on ever since President Nkurunziza's party nominated him for a third term, and he registered.
I'm sorry. I don't think I was clear. I was meaning specifically Rwanda's role. I'm familiar with what's going on.
Rwanda's role in Burundi has been very constructive from my point of view. President Kagame has been very outspoken about the need for President Nkurunziza to respect the Arusha Accord, and Rwanda has been very welcoming to refugees. President Kagame has participated in the meetings with other regional leaders to attempt to persuade President Nkurunziza to restart dialogue with the opposition and create an environment that will be conducive to free and fair elections.
By the way, the general that attempted the coup?
General Niambari's whereabouts, as far as I know, remain unknown.
Was he one of the ones we trained?
Pardon?
Was he one of the ones we trained?
I'd have to get back to you. I'm not aware.
Okay, thank you.
Follow up on my friend's question. With IMET being resumed or in the process of being resumed, Robert Higero today will testify and will reiterate what he has said before, that the Director of Military Intelligence, Colonel Dan Munyuza, was the one who, and he's got this on tape, said, "We have decided to give you this job. You have to go to South Africa and take out General Kayumba and Colonel Karegeya." Now, my question is, when we're doing training, and as you said, it's officers as well as others, will this man be left out of that training? I mean, it seems to me that if this is true, he ought to be indicted for conspiracy to commit murder. Is that on your radar screen? Do you know this man, the colonel?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think this is one of those cases that it precisely falls into the Leahy vetting requirements. So for anyone who would be submitted by the Rwandan government for participation in the IMET program, we would extensively go through all the different allegations that are there, different public accusations and so forth, assess the credibility, and then make a determination about whether this person would be barred or not by law. I think with a person like this who is so publicly connected to some of the allegations that we've discussed, I would assume that that name wouldn't come forward in any way.
Let me ask you, if I could, is Colonel Dan Munyuza, do you know of him? He's the Director of Military Intelligence.
It's a name I'm familiar with. I haven't
What's your
personally
take
met
on
him.
him? Is this a credible allegation?
I think
He's the one on the tape who is saying, and the BBC carried this, and of course the Canadian newspaper, that we can listen to it if you'd like, that he was trying to hire Higero for this assassination.
I think the allegations carry a lot of weight. I think when it comes to the investigations taking place in South Africa related to this incident, we're waiting to see where the judicial process
But again,
goes.
what are we doing regarding this man? I mean, does our military intelligence, does our State Department interface with him as well? I mean, if he is an alleged killer, an assassinator, or at least someone who puts people up to it, what is your view of this man?
From a democracy standpoint, I have not had any contact with him, and I couldn't answer for other colleagues on that. I'm not sure.
Mr. Jackson?
I have not had any direct contact with him, and given the nature of our training programs, I would have to get back to you to see if there is any contact, Mr. Chairman.
Could you? It's very
Yes.
important. We will make that a part of the record. Okay. Ms. Bass, anything else?
No, thank you.
Hey, thank you very much, gentlemen. We'll have some additional questions, so we'll submit for the record. But it is disconcerting to me that Director of Military Intelligence has made these kinds of allegations, have allegations pending against him, and, you know, you have to get back to me on that, back to us as a committee. I wish you would have known that. And I wish something would, you know, if it is true, and maybe it's not credible, but, you know, it would appear that when you get a phone message and it's recorded, we have methods and ways to ascertain whether or not it's an accurate tape recording. So please get back. I'd like to now welcome our second panel, and thank you again, gentlemen. Beginning with Mr. David Himbara, who is an educator, political economist, and author currently working as a consultant focusing on African economic reform. A Rwanda native, Mr. Himbara spent a total of 6 years working for President Paul Kagame as head of strategy and policy in the Office of the President and the principal private secretary to the President. Tasked with improving national competitiveness, Mr. Himbara spearheaded efforts that ultimately improved Rwanda's ranking in the World Bank's annual Doing Business report, from 143rd to 67 out of 183 countries. Prior to his time in Rwanda, he was based in South Africa working pardon me, as a private consultant. But then hear from Major Robert Higaro, who served as an officer in the Rwandan military from 1990 to the year 2010. Major Higaro ran several training operations and commanded troops in the Democratic Republic of Congo and the African Union's peacekeeping force in Sudan, among other missions. Last year, the, the Canadian newspaper The Globe and Mail reported that Major Higaro was one of several men hired to assassinate Rwandan dissenters living in exile. Despite living in exile thousands of miles from Rwanda, he remains concerned about his own security and believes that he is being hunted. We'll then hear from Mr. Willis Shalida, who is a Rwandan-American freelance photojournalist and writes about African affairs. In 1999, on the 5th anniversary of the genocide against the Tutsi, he wrote an opinion editorial that was recognized by the San Francisco Chronicle as the best national opinion editorial of the year. He is a retired special investigator from the California State Bar. We'll also hear from Ms. Sarah Margon, who is the Washington Director of Human Rights Watch. Prior to joining Human Rights Watch, she was an Associate Director of Sustainable Security and Peace Building at the Center for American Progress, where she researched and wrote on a wide range of issues, including human rights, foreign aid, good governance, and global conflicts and crises. She also served in the Senate as Staff Director of the Senate Subcommittee on African Affairs, been a Senior Policy Advisor to Oxfam America, and worked at the Open Society Institute. She also testified before this subcommittee on several times, so welcome back, Mr. Himbara.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman Smith. Ranking Member Bass, first of all, I thank you very, very much indeed for your leadership, for holding this hearing. Secondly, before I go into my, by the way, I also submitted some.
Without objection, your full statement and any attachments for all of our witnesses will be made a part of the record. So proceed as you would like.
Let me also thank you very, very much indeed for your leadership in trying to save the VOA Kenya Rwanda Kirundi service. For God's sake, that is now the only remaining link to the outside world for Rwanda. After the closure of the BBC, there is nothing out there. Let me also take the opportunity to say that, in fact, the chairman of the Independent Media Commission just fled just a week ago. So the space is shrinking. So that VOA, Mr. Chairman, help us. Now, going back now to my presentation. As was mentioned, I worked for President Kagame twice, 2000 to 2002. It didn't work out. When I decided to leave, back to South Africa where I used to live, not in good terms. 2006, he invites me back. We sort ourselves out. He says, no, you can come back and lead the economic reforms, some of the things that we were hearing, which I did up to January 2010. I fled. And one of the issues was actually the same celebrations of the economic miracle. Statistics that are not really credible. I always stood my ground and said, Your Excellency, we are analysts, monitors, reviewers, so if we can't cook statistics. I'll throw some statistic here that people can come also can go out there and look for themselves. If you see, for example, poverty reduction, Rwanda would say, well, 43% of the population are poor. You go to the World Bank, IMF, if you use 1.20 cents dollar as a definition, that's the globally accepted definition, 63% live under that. If we use another global accepted definition, $2 a day, 83% of Rwandans are poor. So people are mistaking the clean streets of Kigali as measure of development. So anyway, that was my conflict. I said, no, we develop, but development is a lie. Is not a lie. It's not prestige. No, it's hard knocks of policy making. So I fled, and when I fled to South Africa, then that's really when my problems began. Chest. Then in 2013, 2014, after the death of my colleague Karegeya, same town, Johannesburg, I thought that was a good sign. I fled even from South Africa. So I went back to Canada. Canadian government itself monitors me and other colleagues because we're not safe. But at least I can sleep a little more peacefully than Johannesburg. Now, the human rights situation, I really don't have much to add beyond what the colleagues earlier on presented. But what I can add on, though, is the angle that most reports fail to capture. They fail to capture four things. First of all, if we look at the human rights situation, the horrific situation in Rwanda, we have to look what we divide prior to 2012 as a phase, then after 2012. Then in those two periods, we look at the targets, who are the targeted types. We look at the official stance. We look at the global environment in Rwanda. And then we look at the impact on development. So let's look at the target between those two periods. Prior to 2012, the targets for harassment, imprisonment, or even killings, like political opponents or media. So individuals like Victoire Ingabire, Dio Mushahidi, these are the people who wanted to compete that are now in jail. We look, in terms of killings, we look at people like Seth Sendashonga. We look at the opposition leader basically beheaded in 2010. So the media types, editors. So really, that period, the targets are clear and predictable. It's either political or media types. But now, when we go now into post-2012, it's no longer just that. No. 3 months ago, President Kagame's personal doctor, Dr. Emmanuel Gasakure, shot in the police cell, killed. Gustave Mokononi, this is the coordinator for Transparency International, strangled. Kagame's personal driver, killed. So, whereas in the prior period, as I said, it's clear, the targets, but now it's almost random. Okay, now, number two, the difference between the two periods. Prior to 2012, the official stance or the official attitude was deny, deny, deny. Post-2012, it's celebration. President Kagame himself, after Karegeya died, said, no, we did not kill him, but I wish we did. Moreover, people like him, it's only when and how. Of all places, that was stated in breakfast prayer in Kigali. Then, few months later, again, the President Kagame said, oh, those people who are making noise about the human rights. No. We are not only going to imprison people, we are shooting them, we're going to shoot them in the broad daylight. All this is in the public domain. So that's difference number two. So the difference number three between the prior and post 2012. Prior 2012, you see, the environment was basically, it's a kind of the usual, the environment was a kind of the usual dictatorial regime. The usual dictatorial regime is, well, you know, for ordinary folk, you just live on and there is no problem. The people who have problems are those high up in politics. But you see, this is no longer the situation. The situation now is that actually we are no longer talking about dictatorship. We're talking about now a totalitarian state seeking to control. So as we move and drive fear into the population, so as we move to 2017, with this business of constitution, the villages, the towns, they are being forced to sign up to say, hey, we want a constitutional amendment. So what you're going to see there in Rwanda is not people demonstrating against the third term, but rather people demanding that the man stays. It's orders. In Rwanda, the smallest administrative unit in the system is called Nyumba Kumi. That means 10 houses. Every 10 houses are watched by one individual. And as you move on, the whole state machinery driving fear is well established. Okay. The last difference between the two periods, the impact on development. Again, you hear how Rwanda is a great success story. Prior to 2012, you see, underground, the government was grabbing business. Not on surface. You wouldn't know it. Well, even American companies like Chevron, property grabbed. But those was kind of underground. But no, now in this current period, there is no apology for grabbing business. A $20 million mall, UTC, in the center of Kigali, is grabbed. And because the owner does not live there. It's as if it's like it's like saying, so in the UK, if I say, well, since Bill Gates does not live in the UK, we are grabbing Microsoft. It's pure madness. So it's that environment then that really it's anti-developmental. So let me now conclude. We thank you again for holding this hearing. We thank you for fighting for the VOA. But also we encourage you that we take this, I saw those hard questions you were posing. So I think we need to keep on that, perhaps even think of a congressional resolution that can seriously have an impact on policy change towards Rwanda. I thank you very much.
Thank you so very much for your testimony. I'd like to now, Mr. Higaro, if you would proceed.
Chairman Smith, Ranking Member Bess, members of the subcommittee, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I think my name has been mentioned several times. I'm Robert Higiro. I was born in Uganda because my parents lived there after being forced out of Rwanda in 1959. So I share the same background with the president because he was also raised in Uganda as a refugee. I was part of the force that seized control of Kigali in 1994, which actually led to the falling of the former Hutu regime and brought an end to the genocide in Rwanda. I did work for 2 decades with the Rwandan military and served in different capacities. I had 2 tours as a peacekeeper, one with the African Union, the initial launch of Darfur peacekeeping, and another one with the United Nations African Union hybrid mission, which is still ongoing. On returning home, that was 2010, I only found that I had been decommissioned and out of job. What that means in Rwanda is that no single investor or businessman is going to work with you because it means you are disfavored from the system. So as my colleague just mentioned, it's a controlled business environment. So I went to Uganda to pursue business opportunities. But not so long, I was summoned back to Rwanda. And I was questioned about my links with the former Army Chief of Staff, General Kayumba Nyamwasa, and former National Intelligence and Security Chief, Colonel Patrick Karegeya. These two officers had, of course, fallen out with President Kagame and had fled to South Africa. This happened to me, but even to other many officers. The most recent examples are Generals Tom Byabagamba, who actually spent the whole of his struggle since 90 to recently in 2010, I think 12, looking after Kagame, protecting him. He was a deputy sector commander in Southern Sudan as a peacekeeper. When he got home, he was taken straight to prison. Same happened to General Frank Rusagara, military attaché in the United Kingdom. After his services, straight to prison. David Kawiye served for a long time, straight to prison. And many, many, many others. The military we are talking about today is no longer there. He has young boys doing the peacekeeping, but all the top cadres that actually helped him get into power, they are either in cells, dead, running, all over the world. Others are idle in the country, which is a very dangerous aspect when it comes to national security. Well, after my interrogation, I was suspicious. I knew that something is wrong, and they want to use me for a dirty job, as usual. Having served 20 years, I knew exactly why they summoned me, and I was met by the military leadership. It was not long, my former trainees warned me that if I don't leave the country, I would be in danger. So I fled to Senegal, thinking if I go as far as possible, they'll forget all about me. But a few months, 2 or 3, somebody is sent by the Director of Military Intelligence, Dan Munyuza, to tell me that they have a job for me. He calls me directly and tells me that they have sat down and decided to give me a job. And the job was to go to South Africa and eliminate former Chief of Staff, General Kayumba Nyamwasa, and former National Security and Intelligence Chief, Colonel Patrick Karegeya. And there's a question you asked, I should state that on record, that is Kagame involved? Up to where? When Munyuza, Director of Military Intelligence, is giving me a mission, he's only quoting the president. Now, I was desperate and I needed time to think about it, because I know that whether you do the job or not, you're going to die anyway. So I called Colonel Patrick, gave him the story, and we agreed that I go to South Africa and play by Dan's motions. I went to South Africa. We discussed between me and General Nyamwasa and Colonel Patrick how to go about it. So we agreed that I should gather as much evidence as possible by recording each and every conversation of instructions of this assassination plan, which could be used like we're using it today. So I recorded these conversations for over 7 months. And eventually, I told Munyuza, of course, that I could do the job. And he said he would offer up to $1 million USA for the job. We went on and on, modalities, the weapons to be used, what he wants me to do, how to do it, etc., etc. And then eventually he couldn't send in the money because we were waiting for the money to come in, which would add on this evidence. But they started, the boss was saying, he tells me, the boss is saying we should wait. Why can't you eliminate them first before you are paid? And I knew something is wrong, and then I had to flee South Africa. I went to Uganda, across to Nairobi, and eventually found myself in Belgium, where I live today as a dissident, like others. In Rwanda, like others, I'm a wanted man. Abroad, I'm on the hit list. Like him, like anybody else. Well, like he said, or the previous speakers, on the New Year's Eve of 2014, Kagame achieved his wish, and that's when Colonel Patrick Karegeya was found strangled in Johannesburg Hotel. I should add here that some of these individuals involved are known. We know them. South Africa is still conducting the investigations. We are waiting, but we know some of these individuals. General Kayumba Nyamwasa has survived, I think, 3 assassination attempts in South Africa. The first one, he was actually shot, but he didn't die. The others, they would find him in a different location, and it has been 3 or 4 times. He's still living. We don't know for how long. For me, when this happened, when Patrick died, I decided to find a reading newspaper, a Canadian newspaper, the Globe and Mail, and shared my story. I gave them access to the tapes. These tapes were independently verified or translated. This paper went as far as interviewing former military officers, and they confirmed indeed the voice belongs to Munyuza. And not only that, there is technology, as you are telling the members of Department of State. We can always verify this voice. If the government says, no, this is not Dan Munyuza, then they should give us the official voice of Munyuza, and we compare with the one I have. If it's not true, then, well, it's not. I cannot go again over the list of Rwandans who were assassinated abroad and in the country. You have talked about it. He has talked about it. We have submitted a copy of that. It's a long one, but the reality is tragic. I would like to end with a message to my fellow Rwandans. Hutus and Tutsis have much to attain for with regard to one another. Like me, many Tutsis support the establishment of truly independent courts that would, follow these crimes committed by President Paul Kagame and his allies. If you allow me, I'll read this quote from Mandela, which he gave out in 1994. I quote, "Out of the experience of an extraordinary human disaster that lasted too long, must be born a society of which all humanity will be proud. The time for the healing of the wounds has come. The moment to bridge the chasms that divide us has come. The time to build is upon us." I sincerely thank the subcommittee for its time and interest, and respectfully ask for help, and the help of the entire US Congress, to urge Rwandans to put aside their divisions, regional, political, and ethnic, and work peacefully together to end this repressive regime. Thank you.
Mr. Hagura, thank you very much for your testimony and for your courage, both you and Mr. Himbara, coming forward as you are, knowing that there are risks, and I thank you. Ms. Margon.
Thank you. I'll just give a bit of a shortened version. I did want to thank you, Chairman Smith and Ranking Member, for holding this really important hearing. I know it's been a long time interest, and for inviting me to testify. I'm glad to be part of it, and also to even out the gender balance on the panel a little bit, so thank you. 21 years after the genocide, Rwanda has come a long way. by any measure, there have been real concrete improvement in terms of economic growth and access to public services. I won't go over the indicators that were mentioned on the last panel, but I do think it's worth noting the country is on track to meet the Millennium Development Goals, as you said, Ms. Bass, for 2015, and the parliament is majority female at nearly 65%. By the sounds of it, Rwanda is not a country in crisis. It's a country where things work. But in reality, it's only some things that work. The same government that has helped so many Rwandans out of poverty and propelled the country's economic growth has done so while severely restricting the fundamental civil and political freedoms of many. Indeed, gains are undermined by two persistent trends. One, systematic domestic repression that stifles, sometimes very violently, dissent, opposition, and independent thought. And two, repeated cross-border meddling and support for abusive armed rebel groups in neighboring Democratic Republic of Congo, or the DRC. International and regional attention on Rwanda has usually been when it's gone cross-border into the DRC, and this has happened at least 4 times since 1996. I today would like to talk much more about the domestic issues because I think actually it is within this environment that government accountability and transparency need to begin. Because in fact, if there had been a viable civil society and media, perhaps the authorities in Kigali might have stopped their meddling operations and other adventures abroad. Rwanda is a country of double realities. Visitors are impressed with the facade, the apparent security, but it's a smokescreen because many Rwandans live in fear, not just because of the legacy of genocide, but because the current government, the only one since the end of the genocide in 1994, runs the country with a tight grip on power. Indeed, the ruling party, the Rwandan Patriotic Front, dominates all aspects of political and public life. This is not new. It's been a constant feature since the end of 1994. Civil society is weak as a result of years of state intimidation, infiltration, and heavy, heavy administrative burdens. Activists have fled, and the one remaining domestic human rights organization was taken over by members sympathetic to the government in 2013. My organization, Human Rights Watch, is falsely accused of supporting the Democratic Forces for the Liberation of Rwanda, or the FDLR, time and time again. Along similar lines, the Rwandan media remains heavily dominated by pro-government views, with most journalists unable or unwilling to investigate and report on sensitive issues. To be fair, the Rwandan government did introduce new media laws and reforms in 2013, which enshrine journalists' right to freedom of opinion and expression. But for the most part, these reforms haven't translated into any reality because of years of intimidation that have led to self-censorship and a decreased interest in investigating alleged abuse or even dissent. The Rwandan government invokes the need to prevent a resumption of ethnic violence as justification for restricting freedom of expression. The practice is disingenuous because it silences all forms of dissent and criticism, including many that have nothing to do with ethnic violence. And that's a tactic that could end up reversing Rwanda's apparent stability and even its economic successes. Despite abundant evidence of serious repression by the Rwandan government, there's been muted international criticism. Kigali enjoys strong support from donor countries like the US, international financial institutions such as the World Bank, and a range of other political actors and independent foundations. The absence of a comprehensive policy approach to address Rwanda's disregard for fundamental rights is stark. Rwanda is held up as the all-too-rare model of successful development in Africa, so the focus stays there. The repressive domestic environment is treated as an ancillary problem, or not treated at all, mostly because it seems it's just too difficult to reconcile this bad narrative with a more positive one. But there's good reason beyond moral considerations for donor governments and all others to consider all at the same time. In 2011, the World Bank's World Development Report argued that peace is most likely to endure if Rwanda's political space is gradually opened up, and it also argued that post-conflict stability premised on economic growth and strong leadership, but without political liberalization on the longer term, may have a finite duration and possibly a dramatic ending. His conclusion is an important warning for this Congress, particularly with the FY16 budget for foreign operations approaching. So what does this mean for U.S. policy? I'll make a couple of very quick recommendations. For starters, the administration and members of Congress should keep speaking out against abuses by the Rwandans. Recent statements have had a tremendous impact. Rwandan officials' insistent denials of repression in their country make it clear that the statements matter. International legitimacy is very important to the Rwandan government. It wants to be a regional player, and condemnation of poor domestic behavior doesn't fit that model. So please, keep up the pressure. Second, I won't go over the VOA again, but Human Rights Watch does support the full funding of VOA, and I was very pleased to hear the State Department say that as well. Thank you both for your leadership on that issue, as well as the chairman and ranking of the full committee. I'd also urge you and the administration to push the Rwandan government to permit the development of a truly independent civil society by allowing human rights groups to operate freely. This is not going to be easy. I note that while it was said on the earlier panel that there's $2 million for the FY15 budget, if you look at the FY13 budget, USAID spent $3.2 million on democracy and governance in Rwanda, but only 500,000 of this went to civil society, and none went to support the rule of law and Human Rights Watch. Sorry? I don't know. You can't find that information too publicly. I tried to look. But the absence of the funds doesn't mean there isn't engagement on the issue. What worries me is that because there is no funding specifically allocated for human rights and the rule of law and more money for civil society, there's no strategic approach being invoked to address these issues in a difficult environment. So I would encourage Congress and the subcommittee in particular to engage very robustly on this issue. Finally, I'll just say that the United States should use its prominent role at the World Bank and with other financial institutions to urge broader guiding principles that are not only rooted in the freedom from want, but also the freedom from fear. I'll close by saying that I'm aware of concerns expressed by some in the administration and also here in Congress that a more public stance on Rwanda's domestic environment would undermine the bilateral relationship between Rwanda and the United States. But the U.S. often underestimates its own leverage and becomes overly cautious. The U.S. may need Rwanda for peacekeeping and other issues, but Rwanda needs the U.S. too. So the U.S. should continue refining its policy on Rwanda and send a strong signal of support to the many citizens who crave the freedom of expression and greater political space, but haven't had access to it. Thank you.
Appreciate it very, very much. Mr. Shalita.
Members of the panel, it's an honor to be invited to speak before you at this hearing. Thank you very much. The diversity of viewpoints included here demonstrates your commitment to a strong partnership between the United States and Rwanda. No topic is closer to my heart, Mr. Chairman. My name is Willis Shalita, and I'm a proud American, but also a very proud Rwandan. But at one time, Mr. Chairman, I had no country. In the early 60s, hundreds of my fellow Rwandans were expelled from our homeland. I lived in exile in Uganda up until Idi Amin's reign of terror made me a refugee for the second time. Mr. Chairman, I've lived under a dictatorship. I know how it feels. I know what to look for. I'm here to tell you today, Rwanda is not a dictatorship. 42 years ago, America welcomed me into this country. I found a home, and also my vocation as a special investigator for the State Bar of California. My job was to separate fact from fiction, build a strong case, and testify under oath about my findings. I did so hundreds of times, Mr. Chairman, over my 28-year career as an officer of the court. Today, I work primarily as a writer with a focus on Rwanda. After the genocide, 1 million Rwandans lay dead. No one had any real idea how to render justice to survivors and perpetrators, much less how to live together again. 21 years later, Mr. Chairman, the country stands out. Rwanda leads the world in women's representation in parliament. Mr. Chairman, things don't happen where there are no conducive conditions. Rwanda ranks #1 among low-income countries in the World Bank's annual Doing Business Index. Professor Paul Farmer of Harvard Medical School found that the Rwandan health system, and I quote, achieved some of the steepest declines in premature mortality ever documented anywhere, end of quote. Funding from the United States played an important role. As has been said, Rwanda is the 5th largest troop contributor to UN peacekeeping missions. Religious freedom is protected in Rwanda. An attempt to criminalize homosexuality was defeated in Rwanda. Rwanda is socially conservative, but gays and lesbians need not worry about government interference in private matters. Now, Mr. Chairman, at this point you may be thinking, yes, but why does there have to be a but? The facts are real. The data comes from trusted independent sources. Is Rwanda perfect? Not even close. But the best way to uncover its flaws is go to Rwanda, where the most scandalous data about the country is made public by its own institutions. Go attend a citizen outreach meeting and tell me if you think Rwandans are too intimidated to tell truth to power. I say not. So why do we often find ourselves adrift in this strange Bermuda Triangle of confusion when it comes to Rwanda? To prepare for this hearing, Mr. Chairman, I put my investigator hat back on. How is it that individuals who once proudly contributed to Rwanda's success now calmly assert that the country is some kind of tropical North Korea? Mr. Chairman, the answer is simple. In fact, simpler than I thought. Money and politics. The House lobbying database records that my fellow witness, Dr. Himbara, hired a top-tier firm in 2014, paying them $190,000. If he can afford that sum on his own, then I want whatever consulting gigs he has. And Mr. Chairman, if the money isn't his, then this committee deserves to know the source of this money. Democracy in Rwanda, now, DIRN, registered its domain. This is his outfit. They registered their domain a week ago, around the same time this hearing was announced. Was something wrong with whatever affiliations were being used before? This committee needs to know. I note that Mr. Higiro here is a senior cadre of the Rwanda National Congress, a foreign political party whose leaders seek the violent overthrow of the Rwanda government. And they even collaborate with the FDLR, a genocidal terrorist organization. Mr. Chairman, people have a right to seek influence, provided they follow the rules. But until we know who foots the bill and why, there is no way to assess the credibility of claims made by this shadowy network. Maybe I'm naive, Mr. Chairman, but my experience is that truth is more or less free for the picking. But if you want people to believe lies, well, that's going to cost you. References have been made about trials or fake trials and imprisonments of Rwandans. Mr. Chairman, I'm here to tell you that trials in Rwanda are open. There has been confidence expressed in the Rwandan judicial system by countries like the US, Canada, Norway, Denmark, who have extradited people who had bloody hands during the genocide against Tutsi. Mr. Chairman, this malicious campaign damages the strong bilateral relationship between Rwanda and America But we must not let cynicism prevail over common sense and core human value that my beloved two countries share in equal strength and measure. Mr. Chairman, with your permission, I will submit a longer presentation for the record. Thank you, sir.
Shalita. Let me just ask you, Mr. Shalita, the Globe and Mail, in an article by Jeffrey York and Judy Rever, which is a very extensive piece that they did, an investigative piece. They point out, and I quote them in pertinent part, that the investigation by the Globe and Mail found a common thread in interviews about plots to murder exiles. Rwandan agents search for vulnerable people within the social circles of their targets, then put pressure on them or offer them money in exchange for their cooperation. In some cases, the agents go back repeatedly to do the same potential assassins, even if they fail to do the job, urging them to do what they were paid to do. You've heard today witnesses, two, who have personal knowledge, one with recordings that I have asked, and I will continually ask the State Department to review. I find it appalling that they have not done so yet, and maybe they have, and somebody will emerge and say, oh, I've done that. But it certainly has not percolated to the point where the policymakers, the Assistant Secretary acting, and of course, Mr. Feldstein, have any knowledge of. They have to get back to us on that. And then, of course, Mr. Himbara, who was literally there with him and was part of a team on the economic side. Are you saying this isn't true?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity to respond to that. Having been an investigator for 28 years, let me say this. Allegations are simply that. I welcome your request that these allegations, these accusations, be verified by independent parties. Let me say this, Mr. Chairman. The South African government, looking into General Nyamasa's attempted assassination, has not finished its investigation. So how do we rush to conclusion that the Rwanda government was involved?
Well, before I go into our other witnesses, just let me say, and even acting Assistant Secretary Jackson pointed out that they expressed concern in January 14 about the succession of what appeared to be politically motivated killings of government critics in exile. And then he went through a long list of, he did not elaborate when asked, and I'm sure he'll get back. But, I think there are people very concerned within our U.S. Department of State. I think Ms. Morgan is probably very concerned about these people who are turning up dead. And when South Africa and other nations do take actions to investigate, and it's very hard, to cross border especially, to really get to the truth of what's happening and when and where. But when you see a pattern, reasonable men and women say, there's a real problem here. And as Mr. Higaro said, and I thought that was very telling, that when statements are made by the Director of Intelligence about killing, he's only quoting the president. That's pretty strong allegation.
Yes, if you don't mind, Mr. Chair, if you could yield. Didn't you said that the South Africans were still investigating, and I thought the South Africans expelled the Rwandan representatives, no?
Thank you,
I thought
Ranking Member. No, if I can correct you, the South African government has come to the conclusions that the alleged assassins were from Rwanda. The conclusion, Madam Member, has not been made that the Rwanda government was involved. We live in America where you are assumed innocent until proven otherwise. Right. There is no conclusive evidence.
No, but I thought they expelled the Rwandan diplomats. So it wasn't just that it was a Rwandan that they said committed the crime, but I thought that they kicked out the diplomats. They did not kick out the Rwandan ambassador from South Africa?
Thanks again. During the exchange of words, as happens always, the Rwandan ambassador was asked to leave. But soon thereafter, Rwanda sent back another ambassador, and we have, Rwanda has an ambassador in Johannesburg.
Let me just ask further on this. if Paul Kagame is not in any way complicit in any of this, nor his director of national intelligence, would you then support, and would the Rwandan government support, an international team of investigators who would have unfettered access to information, to people, so that they can investigate this and go to source material, look at logs, look at wherever the investigation takes them? Because otherwise, I would be concerned about a whitewash. Again, more people dying. I'm very worried that this is in escalation, not in decline. Especially as Mr. Himbar mentioned earlier, you know, the two phases. It's political opponents, but now it's morphed into his driver and other people who, you know, are selected for killings. And it just raised serious questions about how wide and how deep this will go in terms of the killings. So would you support, do you believe the administration would support, I'm talking about the Kagame administration, unfettered access and an investigation by an international team of maybe under UN auspices or AU auspices who would get to the bottom of this?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for the question. As I stated before, I don't speak for the Rwanda government. I'm here on my own as an American Rwandan who is interested in what goes on in my country. Mr. Chairman, your question is above my pay grade, but I would join with you having an independent body investigating these allegations. Again, Mr. Chairman, these are nothing but allegations.
But again, you know, we did invite you to join us. The embassy of Rwanda requested that, and I want all sides at all times, you know, on something so important as this, to be present at the table. So I would hope you would take that back.
Mr. Chairman.
Join us in asking that Kagame allow that kind and even embrace it. If he's innocent, if I were innocent, and I were in his shoes, I would demand that there be an international investigation to clear my name. There's nothing, as Proverbs says, more important than one's name. The book of Proverbs, you know, if your name is tarnished, you invite people who have no political agenda whatsoever to go in and uncover the truth.
Mr. Chairman, again, I was asked by the Rwanda embassy to come and testify because they know of my passion about what goes on in Rwanda. I have no affiliation. I have no place in making decisions like you are asking for. However, let me say this, Mr. Chairman. I would support you fully, 100%, to send an independent organization to look into allegations. Again, Mr. Chairman, these are nothing but allegations. And making allegations doesn't make a witness believable or not believable. It should be put to test, and all evidence should be brought in and verified.
Did you want to respond?
Thank you, Chairman. I think the ranking member, Karen, she got it right. So the court case on attempted assassination of Nyamwasa, the original one, was settled in court. And the result of that case was that, no, it's not actually the ambassador that was kicked out. No, the ambassador of Rwanda is the only person that was left. All the other Rwandan diplomats were expelled. And it's important to hear what the judge said. The South African judge said, well, we are sending these 4 people to jail for this attempted assassination, but actually the people who should be in this court are authorities in Rwanda. That is clear. Then further north, in Sweden expelled a Rwandan diplomat for harassing Rwandan diaspora. Down south in UK, the Metropolitan Police, aka the Scotland Yard, had to send warnings to British Rwandans to watch out because they were targets. But for the South African case, done. It's a done deal. Absolutely, you are right. Yes.
I just want to ask a couple of questions, and we'll get back. Let me ask, Mr. Higaro, in your opinion, is the U.S. Department of State pressing an investigation into the killings and the alleged conspiracy to assassinate well enough, aggressive enough? Have you been interviewed by anyone? Have your tapes been analyzed from CIA to U.S. Department of State, as far as you know? And where is Colonel Dan Muyuza, the Director of Military Intelligence? Is he still in that position in Rwanda, or has he been dismissed? Where is he?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dan Munyuza actually was moving with me. I was employing him indirectly. So he started this when he was the Director of Military Intelligence. But you know, we have the Chief of External Intelligence, who is supposed to be dealing with people like us who are supposed to kill people outside the country. So because of the way they thought I'm going to do something great and become a hero, as they told me, he was moved from the Directorate of Military Intelligence to the Director of External Intelligence. So I continued with him. When the mission aborted, he was taken to prison slightly. And then he was brought back as he's now the Deputy Police Commander. You know, but he's still in Rwanda. Let me make something clear. It doesn't really matter where Dan Munyuza or Jack Nziza, it doesn't matter what post they hold in the government or in the military or in the police. It's just a shadow for them to do what they're supposed to do. These are two gentlemen who get direct orders from the president. They are the ones who have killed almost everybody that has died. The state center shongers they are talking about, they were killed by Jack Nziza in Nairobi when he was a diplomat there. It doesn't matter where they are. But I'm going to defend my colleague, Mr. Sharita. I feel sorry for him. I feel sorry for Rwandans who are here. I feel sorry for the diplomats in these embassies of Rwanda. They are told what to say. There are lines they can't cross, and you can't see him. He doesn't really have even that information. They don't even feed him information to support them. You know, he doesn't know anything about these cases. He's an American. He has been in America, has never lived in Rwanda. He doesn't understand what's going on, you know. But the passion he talked about, he thinks the country is moving in a direct direction. And I'm sure he's going to find out more after this hearing, and probably we're going to talk about it. So that's the truth. And to the other question of the State Department, they have not done that so far. They have never reached me. They have never reached me, but I've shared this with the Belgian government. And I think they know because, of course, when we're asking for asylum, we need to give such evidences to support our criteria to be recognized. And still on that point, I would request to clarify that even where we are not safe. And the governments, like you asked the department responsible, they think it's a game or a joke or it's not really serious, but it is very serious. The widow and children to the late Colonel Patrick Karegeya was strangled in South Africa are here in US. But they have been denied asylum up to now because of this conspiracy. I'm not accusing anybody, but there is a problem. They are like prisoners. They don't move out of US. It's a current situation. You can take it from there and find out what is the problem. What kind of criteria does this family that their own father and husband was strangled in South Africa does not fulfill for them to get asylum in this democratic country? You know, it's a big issue. The conventions, the Geneva Conventions are clear. But something is wrong somewhere. Even us in Belgium, in Europe, in Africa, the refugees from Rwanda. Let's talk about the kidnapping of Lieutenant Mutabazi to Rwanda. It was against the law. But the Ugandan government has never said anything about that. The UNHCR has never said anything about that. But it was wrong. The wife and the children to this lieutenant are somewhere in a camp in Uganda. The children are not going to school. She was supposed to be taken somewhere. She's still there. So are we doing enough? Is these strong countries doing enough on what we are talking about? Absolutely not. We are here. I put my life on the line to come here and say, look here, the problem is this. And I do this in many different capacities, and I talk to different Rwandans, Hutus, Tutsis. I educate every day, every day, every day. I talk to whoever I meet. I've talked to different diplomats, but nothing is being done. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I want to ask the two of you, and feel free to chime in, Ms. Margolin. What's Kagame's motivation? I mean, I'm assuming that you are saying he's going to run again for a third term. What's his motivation? If he's so strong, why does he need to do this?
Thank you. The third term thing is complicated now. I think Himbara talked about it. What even Mr. Sharita believes is that the Rwandans love Kagame. Kagame is going to have a youth gathering in Texas, Dallas, on Saturday. Do you know the number? 700 young boys and girls. Do you know where they're coming from? Rwanda, the diaspora here, Canada, Europe. Do you know who funds them to go there? The government. The money you give him.
The money we give him.
Yeah.
You're saying he's flying Rwandans in
He's
from
flying
all
the
of those
Rwandans to-
countries?
Yes.
They don't live in Texas?
Not everybody's in Texas. And they have to feed, they have to sleep. I mean, it's not my...
Well, he's having a rally of
Yes.
Rwandans
Yes.
in Texas, and
And
he's
it's not my
flying them from
saying.
all over the world to be there?
Yes.
So what you're saying is that he does not have the support at home?
I don't know.
I mean, why does he need to assassinate people all over the world?
What should I say? I mean, we fought a very complicated war from 90 to 94.
Mm-hmm.
The Rwandans have experienced, mention any single crime which can help us that has not been committed in Rwanda. What does the president want that I don't want for Rwandans?
You want to respond to that? Yes. Why does he need to do that?
There are several reasons why the situation has become what it is. First, remember that already the U.S. had to apply for immunity for President Kagame. He made history here from a lawsuit. That's one. That is from the widows of the presidents that were shot down. This government applied for immunity for him. The Congo mapping report, the UN mapping report concluded that there is enough material there to indict Kagame for genocide.
So he's doing this so that he doesn't have witnesses around what he did?
So
he's
the moment he leaves power, the immunity is gone. That's one reason.
okay.
It's immunity that there's so many people that he has offended, including, okay, so that's one. Number two, this development, the so-called development people are talking about, do you know the biggest the biggest companies that actually control the Rwandan economy. It's the Rwandan Patriotic Front companies. The holding company is called Crystal Ventures Limited. It controls just about everything. So President Kagame, he wears two hats. He's the president of, no, he wears three hats. President of Rwanda, chairman of the party, but also the leading businessman. So the Rwandan version of capitalism actually is crony capitalism. He loses that office. Who knows what that business empire will be?
Okay, so Mr. Shalita,
Yes.
everything that you've said is that, I guess, is that there's no proof of anything. Everything's just allegations?
What we've had here today, and you know, having been an investigator for 28 years, investigating the best lawyers in this country, I hear nothing but allegations. If there are facts, why not share them with you?
Well, I think that Mr.
I resent the fact that my fellow witnesses here, they think they're entitled, well, they're entitled to their opinion, but they are not entitled to their own facts. Let me say something, Mr. Chairman.
Again, we
The
have a
allegation,
man who has recorded the request that he assassinate two individuals that the Toronto newspaper and the BBC found credible. To my chagrin, and I'm sure the ranking member, our own State Department has not even listened to those tapes. I mean, that is evidence. That's evidence. Of course, there's a due process stream that needs to be followed, but when you get multiple allegations with streams of evidence, begs the question, why are we looking the other way and acting as if none of it's credible?
with all due respect, Mr. Chairman, what the newspaper in Canada says is not evidence.
Well, no, let me just ask you this, and
legal
I'll get to you.
institution.
Let me just ask you this, as an investigator. If there are tapes, would you then want to have a tape of the voice of the person who the allegation is made about? Because there's enough science to prove whether or not it's the same person.
Sure.
It doesn't seem to be
I have not
deep.
I have not listened to the tape. I have read the transcript in its entirety.
I know, I'm just saying as an investigator,
Yes.
Wouldn't that conclude?
I would want the real voice of Colonel
Right.
Dan Munyuza to
That's what I'm
compare
saying.
with what's alleged this
Right.
gentleman
So
has.
if that was done, wouldn't we be able to know?
If it was done, yes.
Okay.
I would
mean, it's
absolutely
just
agree with you.
hard to believe that there's just allegations and nothing's ever been proven.
Well, for instance, Mr. Hijiro has made an accusation that Rwandans are being flocked to Texas. I live in Austin, Texas. I want to go on the record and challenge him. Tell me where are these Rwandans?
Okay, well,
Where are they?
actually, I would like to just ask Mr. Margon, you know, from my part, if you don't mind, Mr. Chair, I'll conclude my questions by just asking you to respond to both sides of what I asked.
Sure. I also wanted to respond to your point about what Rwandans want in the next election. Look, Human Rights Watch hasn't done an investigation into what happened in South Africa, and as I understand it, the South Africans have undertaken an investigation themselves. The outcome remains unknown to date, so we do still have that. I think what we're looking at as an organization whose currency is their independent research is that we have repeatedly documented a climate of fear and incredibly violent tactics that have been used against dissenters in Rwanda. It is a government that is maintaining its power through a strategy and approach of that type. We have seen it with disappearances that we documented from March until November 2014, which we put out a report on, which the State Department also commented on. That is not a new thing. It is still happening to some degree, although it seems to be at a lesser one. but repeatedly the decimation of independent voices is not simply because there wasn't money for it or because people felt they could do better things like go into business. It was because they were afraid for their lives, and they have fled the country, many still living in fear outside borders. And so while we haven't done research on this specific issue, I did want to put it within the broader context of what we're looking at, which is a government that is maintaining a very tight and in some cases very aggressive and violent grip on power. In terms of your questions about what Rwandans want, I think it's hard to tell. Nobody knows what Rwandan wants because they're afraid to speak out. If you look at the past elections of the president, it is, I think it was 73% for the last election in 2013, and 95, and in 2010 it was about 73 or 75% in favor of Kagame. Who knows how many of those people actually wanted the president and his party to win? It's too fearful. Most people, I would say, based on our research, are too afraid to do anything else. You're looking at an environment that may not on election day, let's say, be free and fair as we start to think about the 2017 elections, but it's an overarching context which we've seen in other countries on the continent, including we will see this weekend in Ethiopia. An overarching election environment is not at all conducive to a legitimately free and fair election. It is important to think about that when you think about what the people of Rwanda are doing and saying.
I'm sorry, but a little comparison though. The Ethiopian diaspora is very active, and there's also a lot in Ethiopia that I think is very well known. So I think with Rwanda, unless I'm just not aware of it, it just doesn't seem to be that level of activity. I don't know if it's whether it's social media or not. Maybe the Rwandan diaspora is active in other countries. I don't. Yes.
Let me tell you why it's very difficult to be active. Why Rwandan communities, it's very difficult for us to be active.
In Rwanda.
No, even here. So now
Okay.
I'm going to say something that I had held back. Because I'll cry, but also because it will put my brother into danger.
You made your point.
No, yeah.
Your point is clear.
But
And-
I think I need to put it out here on the record anyway.
I prefer you not. Let me just move on. Mr. Salida, and then I'll come back to you. Right, exactly.
Is the Rwandan diaspora very active? Very active. For the record, for the last 3 years, every September, more than 5,000 Rwandans meet on Rwanda Day. Is that active or what?
Where?
The last year was in Atlanta. The year before that was in Chicago.
Well, that's what
The
you're
year
talking about.
before was in Boston. This addresses the fact that we are very active. I have been very active on Rwandan issues, probably before Mr. Hijiro was born. Look at my blog. Look at
I
the
will.
social media
All right.
of Rwandans exchanging their views on the country. And they're all not supportive of President Kagame. And most of these come from Rwanda,
Okay.
for the record.
Let me go back and could allow you to finish, and then I'm done.
The only point I was going to make is that, I think Ethiopia is a much larger country with a larger diaspora, which may be part of the reason, which happens to be centered in Washington, which may be part of the reason you hear from them
LA.
more regularly. But also, I do think when you look from our objective perspective, you do see similar issues of development, success being put forward. And our attempt or our effort is not to undermine the successes that are real and important to the actual people who are receiving them, but to look at the other side of the coin and figure out how better to integrate the two for the long-term gain of the country overall.
Okay.
Sorry, can I say something?
Yeah.
Compliment something?
Yep. Go ahead.
Just like I said before, Mr. Sharita, whatever he sees, we see. Let me give you an example of what he's talking about. A few months in Belgium, Brussels, they had a conference of about 40 presidents and head of states, President Obama inclusive. The only president that had demonstrations is Paul Kagame. There were two sides. One side singing and praising him, another side against him. And you ask yourself, what kind of speciality, why is Rwanda unique? Why is amongst 40 heads of state, only one single president is having this? You know, think about it. What's wrong? Why does the Rwandans abroad have to put a lot of effort in receiving Kagame wherever he goes? What's the problem? There's something called Rwanda Day. You know, Rwanda Day. If you don't go there, it's a problem. Then you'll never go back home. That's one. Two, in Belgium now, I'm going to give a specific example. If you're a Rwandan and you probably have attained the nationality, Belgium nationality, if you want to go to Rwanda, you need an invitation. Just think about that. Do you know why? It's because they want to control people in the diaspora and connect them with where they are going. Why? Because they think people like us are sending messages to Rwanda. So they want to know who is from Belgium, where did he land, which house, like he said. As simple as that. I mean, what are we talking about? Look at the region, you know? Let's start from Congo. What happened in Congo? How many times did we go to Congo? And Mr. Shaita should understand that I have the credibility to talk about this. I've served that state for a long time, since I was little. I grew up in that system. I know each and everything. I was in the Congo, for the record, once, twice. When we took over Congo in 1997, and Kagame fell out with Kabila, the old Kabila, we were called back swiftly and relaunched again for a coup d'etat, which didn't materialize. We ended up in Angola. We fought wars you can never imagine. We fought our ally, Uganda, in Kisangani. You know that. What does the guy want? From Congo, we go to Uganda. President Museveni has made peace with President Kagame because he was disturbing him. He was actually funding their opposition. President Kagame has publicly stated that he's going to hit Kikwete, President Kikwete of Tanzania when time comes. It's public information. So what are we talking about? It's all out there. It's not a secret. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, just, we are going to have to conclude the hearing, but I just want to make a couple of final points. We will follow up on requesting that Kagame allow an investigative unit, maybe under UN auspices or AU auspices, that would go wherever the evidence takes them, and to interview without fear of retaliation those men and women who have been intimidated. I think, Ms. Margolin, you make a very good point about the climate of fear, the use of violence. I remember Greg Simpkins and I, on one trip to Darfur, before we got there, we went to Ethiopia. We met with President Meles. It was soon after several people were gunned down in post-election violence and in an election that was anything but free and fair. And we met with President Meles, who was absolutely dismissive of the violence. It was a matter of fact, when we left, I actually, and Greg and I worked very hard on this, wrote a bill called the Ethiopian Human Rights Act with benchmarks. When the House flipped to Democratic control, my ranking member and good friend, and now sadly deceased, Donald Payne, took it up and it became his bill. It was Payne-Smith. First it was Smith-Payne. And the idea was that we got to be serious about human rights. And I can think of no important issue than protecting people from violence, beatings. I've heard of, almost like a Dr. Jekyll, Dr. Henry Hyde type of the face that Kagame gives to the Western world and to, Westerners versus what he does to his own people. And that is really very, very disconcerting, especially since there is seemingly a pattern of extrajudicial killing. So we need to get to the bottom of this. This subcommittee is committed to it. Again, I think at great risk to yourselves, you have come forward. Ms. Higuera, I just can't say how deeply I respect, as well as you, both of you, for coming forward. I'm sure the other human rights groups would love to operate freely and in an unfettered fashion. You're not. You're trying, and I deeply we all appreciate that. But there is risks to the people who bear witness to the truth. So thank you again for that work you're doing, Ms. Margone. You know, we are going to follow up on this. I hope to hear back from the State Department on what they're doing. You know, again, Ambassador Jackson made some very good comments about their concerns, but we got no sense as to what the return mail showed. When we raise these issues, how do we do it? He said one was done on the fringes of another of the African meetings here. That doesn't cut it. This should be our ambassador. This should be our top people at our mission in, as well as the Assistant Secretary and right up to the Secretary level, even President Obama, raising these issues face to face with details about individuals. You know, so human rights get short shrift. I've been in this Congress 35 years, and I get so angry, and that's the only word to describe it, whether it be China or Rwanda, or as it was even under the Bush administration in Ethiopia, when we just, you know, Melis was able to claim, you know, a robust commitment to peacekeeping, but that doesn't provide a whitewash for serious human rights abuse. We welcome that, you know, that they're deploying peacekeepers, but it's not a whitewash, and can never be so construed. So, yes.
One final point, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your leadership. I think this committee would be interested in finding out why Mr. Higiro was dishonorably discharged. Once you find that out, then, Mr. Chairman, ask yourself this question. Somebody who is dishonorably discharged, would this be the same individual given a task to go and commit an assassination?
Let me just say very clearly that needs to be taken with a grain of salt, big time. You know, when you are the focus of a government retaliation or a death threat, I mean, whistleblowers don't fare well anywhere, whether it be the United Nations, where many have been summarily dismissed, and I have held hearings and done work along those lines to protect those who speak out against corruption at the United Nations, or within our own U.S. government. I mean, we're always passing new laws, enhanced protections for whistleblowers, because they get the back of the hand anywhere in the world, including in the UN or the United States, and I would respectfully submit in Rwanda as well. Again, we have credible newspapers. BBC is a credible news media organization that have looked into this and come out with articles and recordings. They get retaliated against too. So let's not forget that. That Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, if there are death squads being deployed to kill the diaspora and the political opponents, or as you said, Mr. Mbara, the phase two, even others, we need to get to the bottom of it. And we owe it to the Rwandans who deserve not a country where there's a climate of fear, but where there's a robust democracy where human rights and economic prosperity go hand in hand. So thank you for your testimonies. The hearing is adjourned.